Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Emmy nominees panel. My name is Joaquin Elizondo, and I am the creator of the Hollywood Editing Mentor program and podcast. And I'm excited to host this conversation with these talented creatives in post-production. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. First up, we have the composing team for the BECKHAM documentary. Please welcome Anze Rozman.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
And Camilo Forero.
Hi there. It's good to be here.
Great to have you guys. We also have editors on Reservation Dogs. Please welcome Patrick Tuck.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having us.
And Varun Viswanath, ACE.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Great to have you here as well. First of all, congrats on the Emmy noms. That's so awesome. How are you guys feeling?
Excellent.
Yeah, it's
Overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Yeah, that's what it is.
Well, first of all, I want to hear about your projects that you have here for Emmy contention. Let's start off with the BECKHAM team. Tell us more about the BECKHAM documentary.
So it was such a fulfilling project for us to be on. It all started around summertime last year, when our boss, Russell Emanuel, who is also the score producer, called us into his office and said, "Hey, I have this show." He didn't tell us what it was about. He said, "I have about 10 minutes or 15 minutes to show you guys, and just watch it and then let's talk." And we immediately, saw the first scene of David Beckham being a beekeeper without spoiling too much. And it was like, okay, it's a David Beckham documentary about him being a beekeeper. But then it just kept on going, and we were glued for those 15 minutes. And he said, "Well, do you guys want to do it?" And we said, "Yeah, of course." I mean, we were in it, And he said, "Well, there's a catch. We still need to pitch for it. We have about 2-3 days to make Fisher Stevens, the director, and Michael Hart, the editor, and John Batzig, the producer, comfortable with them working with us." Mm-hmm. And we had to score those for first 15 minutes. And the second catch was that we had about 5 weeks time for all of the 4 episodes. So it was a very, very fast-paced project. We were on the phone with Michael Hart and Fisher almost every night, and we were working, around the clock to get it done. But we're very, very proud of what we managed to achieve. But big, we had such a great project to work on to begin with, and we wouldn't be able to do the work we did without the genius of Fisher and Michael.
Even though it sounds like it was a very stressful project just based on the deadline, I actually have only positive memories.
Yeah,
and I think we keep talking about this.
Memories.
We actually went to bed at reasonable hours. We didn't lose any sleep on that. And I think part of the reason why it happened like that is because we managed to be very, very organized, and our workflow with the editing team and with Fisher, the director, was it ended up being, very smooth, just based on the fact that, for example, they were in London, they were in a different continent, and so by the time we would go to bed, they would start their day, give us notes, and then by the time we came back to the studio, we already had their feedback and direction to just keep going, So in theory, if you do the math, that was like a 24-hour cycle when you put the two teams together. And I think because of that, it wasn't really a stressful project. And the other thing is they also had a very clear direction when they came to us. They knew exactly what they wanted, what they needed. They already knew where the music was gonna go. Like, they had all of that figured out. So nothing but good things to say about the project and the amazing team that made that happen.
Just curious, how, like, normally on a typical project, how much time are you given to say work on the score versus this one? Just people get an idea.
Well, I think I was on this podcast last year with my co-composer and wife, Kara Talvi, and we did Prehistoric Planet last year. We were nominated for an Emmy for that score, together with Hans Zimmer. But for that, we had almost 10 months for each season, for 5 episodes of 40 minutes of music. But it's a different type of music, but still, for the audience to kind of grasp the differences. Camilo and I just did another BBC projects, and we had about 8 months,
Yeah.
9 months.
9
So,
months.
5 weeks is very little. It's very, very little, but it's definitely possible if you have a great project to work on.
And a great team to also support us. Because because we're part of Bleeding Fingers, we have this system around us that allows us to just focus on the music, right? And then other than us, we also had an additional composer helping us with additional music. His name is Chris Brocato. And so, the team that we also have on our end made that happen, and made it possible for us to, get to the deadline without, again, losing any sleep, without yelling at each other, without being terrible to each other. So,
all good things.
Just wanted to give a shout out to them, because they actually came through big time for us.
Well, I mean, that's just impressive. And no, I do remember the cool instruments you showed us last time. Now, let's hear from the team on Reservation Dogs, Patrick and Varun. Tell us about your project now that's been nominated for an Emmy.
Yeah, Reservation Dogs is about 4 Native American teenagers who live on the reservation in Oklahoma, who start off wanting nothing more than to leave their community behind after their friend Daniel passes away. And they actually want to run off to California. But they end up realizing, throughout 3 seasons of the show, that the true value of their community is the people that make it home. So yeah, that's Reservation Dogs.
Yeah, and we end up taking a lot of tonal adventures. Like right in the beginning, it comes, it's presented as like, oh, it's a coming of age story with 4 teenagers and teenage hijinks and dealing with grief of losing a friend. But then the show slowly expands its scope from being just a teen dramedy. It becomes, we bring in characters from older generations, and start talking about intergenerational relationships that way, and the myths and the legends and the spirituality of Native culture, and kind of how different generations engage with that and how they engage with each other with that. There's like social commentary on how Native Americans and Native First Nations in Canada, how they kind of interact with larger society, on how they interact with pop culture or law enforcement and all of that. There's social commentary about all of that. And even tonally, I think we have episodes that are many episodes that are directly kind of inspired by classics like Dazed and Confused and Close Encounters of the Third Kind and the Before Sunrise series. So we really got to play a lot with a very wide palette that we slowly expanded. And I've had a front seat to this because I started on the pilot and all the way till the finale of 3 seasons, and then Patrick joined us in season 2, and so he's been around for a significant portion of the show as well.
Well, let's dive deeper into these projects. I mean, you're talking about tone, and so for like each of your Emmy contending projects, what specific scene or sequence are you most proud of, and why? And Varun, we'll start with you since you're on the spot.
Yeah, in this finale episode, I mean, we have, it's a very big farewell episode. Lots of different people saying farewell to each other, and also like people helping each other, being like, what do you do from here in a place of when you're mourning somebody. So we actually have many contenders of great scenes over here. but the one that sticks out for me and the one that I enjoyed the most is the scene between Bear, who is one of our main characters, played by Defaro Wunatai, who was also nominated for Best Actor in Comedy. His scene with the Spirit, William Knifeman, played by Dallas Goldtooth, who's also a writer on the show, and does a lot of improv comedy. So that was the inciting kind of emotional incident in the pilot of Bear interacting with this Spirit character. And I got to have a hand in that scene, and so cutting this scene at the end, which is their final scene, was very emotional to me. And it's kind of it encapsulates Reservation Dogs as an idea and a show really well. We kind of create this, using all the improv comedy that they do, we try to create this comedic couch for the emotional growth to sit on, and so the scene kind of starts off with them saying, Bear reaching out to the Spirit, trying to say, okay, I haven't seen you in a while, I want to talk to you. And then he kind of comes in comedically and has a lot to say about, like, you asked me to get out of your life, all of that. And so that leads into kind of a comedic entry. And then kind of gives him the space to make his big realization that he wants to stay within the community. He's no longer yearning to leave right away, and he's taking his journeys, he's taking his emotional journey slowly. And that kind of brings it to the main thing that the Spirit has been telling him, like, we don't need more warriors, we don't need more leaders, we need more warriors, right? So you be a part of the community. And then again, we cap it off with a silly joke again, which is very classic to the show. You can have all this emotional growth, but we don't take ourselves seriously, so that's my favorite scene to edit. And we shared scenes on this episode. So Patrick, what was your favorite scene?
I think I'd have to say my favorite scene is the final scene of the series. I think I'm most proud of it in terms of, it's a eulogy from Willie Jack, but it's also, these like musical moments that break into these flash forwards of where these characters are ending up, and there's something very like free flowing and like beautifully rhythmic about it that I'm very proud of. But also, I think I'm really proud of how the editing, I think we both worked really hard to make sure that the editing, especially in this episode, wasn't too controlling, and that we really wanted the characters and the audience to feel present in the moment and feel like we're not trying to push something stylistically onto this story. The script is already like a perfect work of art, and we were trying to enhance it the best we could. And I think our contribution to that was making sure that that we could feel the patience of being in the moment and feeling present in that moment of appreciating those people around you and the community that you belong to. And the final shot is actually no editing at all. It's a very long shot of Willie Jack and all of the Res Dogs joining together for one last scene to say goodbye to their friend Fixico, and it actually like perfectly mirrors the scene where they say goodbye to their friend Daniel in the pilot. And so it's one long shot that I think is very feels like matured filmmaking, which is reflecting on sort of their growth as characters, as well as like everyone who worked on this show, I think, grew from working together. So yeah, I think a lot of that encapsulates sort of my experience with working on the show, and I'm very proud of it.
Anze and Camilo, give us some insight into your favorite scenes or sequences from the BECKHAM documentary.
Sure. So for me, I would say one of my favorites, at least, is a scene at the beginning of episode 2. The episode is called Seeing Red, and the scene, we also called it like that. By the way, our soundtrack is out. So the piece of music that I'm talking about is also called Seeing Red. But anyway, so essentially what is happening is that David is dealing with a huge mistake he made on the first episode. And we are seeing the aftermath of something really, really foolish that he did on episode 1 that essentially ruined his life. And so now we're seeing the aftermath of how him, his family, and the country, meaning England, reacted to this. And we wrote this piece of music that the director and the editor ended up loving. And the reason why I have such a fond memory of this piece of music is because it gave us a very clear direction to go with the rest of the show, because this is like perhaps the first scene that we scored during the pitch process. And so once they loved it, we were like, oh, okay, we know where to go from here. And from that piece of music essentially gave us a lot of melodies. It informed the harmonies that we used. It informed the pacing, the style, the tone. Like, out of that, essentially we build the DNA of our score out of that piece of music. And so even though it happened very early in the process, it's still like in my memory because of that, you know. And then, you know, the editor ended up using it in multiple places throughout the show and changing some of the scenes that he had already edited to conform to this piece of music. And so, you know what I'm saying? It ended up being such a huge part of the project. And without that piece of music, I feel like we wouldn't be here talking about an Emmy nomination or anything like that, you know? So definitely one of my favorites. What about you, man?
Yeah, it's the Seeing Red is kind of, if you agree, it's like things are going wrong music. Things are not okay. There's a certain, you know, mournfulness to it, and kind of like almost like a weird sense of nostalgia in the music, but in a when you, not nostalgia is maybe not the right word, when you think about something in the past that haunts you.
right, like
And
regret.
Then we wrote a separate piece of music that's at the end of this episode we call like the leader scene. And it's kind of like the Beckham's redemption scene, and it takes place in one of the matches that they're playing, and you have Sir Alex Ferguson, the coach, on camera watching the archival footage. You have his teammates on camera watching the archival footage, and they talk about him becoming a leader, growing, and bringing the whole team together again, like kind of rising from the ashes like a phoenix. So then that piece of music became the contrast of the Seeing Red piece of music. That piece of music is then again Michael Hart used in various scenes. Also, he ended the show with that piece of music. And it's kind of it's like David Beckham as the leader, as the icon, as this force to be reckoned with. So yeah, I think those are probably the two scenes that really helped us shape.
And if you go to our album, if you're wondering, that piece of music is called Captain Beck's, if you want to find it and listen to it.
We should have called it Leader, but Captain Beck's has a nice.
Yeah. So it's the first
sure.
piece of music on the album. Just letting you know.
Definitely will check it out, and listeners too. Give it check it out as well. Well, staying with the Beckham documentary, I mean, Anze and Camilo, I mean, given David Beckham's journey from humble beginnings to global stardom, how did you musically interpret the different phases of his life? And also, can you describe the motifs or themes you developed for key moments in the docuseries?
Yeah, sure. So something interesting that we did with the show, and I'm glad that you are asking this, because usually on film music and TV music, what happens is that you associate certain melodies to a character, right? You have the protagonist theme, you have the antagonist theme, or whatever. But on this particular show, we ended up going in a different direction slightly, where instead of writing things for a specific character, we would write themes for particular moments that would repeat like throughout different episodes, right? Like, for example, as Anze was saying, this piece of music where David is rising from the ashes, as opposed to a melody specifically for David, right? So then that's a moment as opposed to a character. So then we have certain pieces of music where something is happening with the family, when the family is coming together, right? So then that would be a different theme. We also have some, I remember this one. There's like a 2-note motif, very, very simple motif that we wrote for the really hard moments, like David going, everything going badly for him, you know, and him,
which is most of the show.
yeah, so kind of like you know, what is the expression that they use, like going to the bottom,
yeah, rock bottom.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
If I may jump in,
yeah, of course.
More than motivic development in the show, it was more important to grasp the different editing techniques used and how things were portrayed in that way. You have these very important in the show, like I think the most iconic part of the show is front-facing camera to oh god, now my camera switched.
As soon as you said that, the camera just switched.
Yeah.
Front-facing camera, like right into the face of the cast, like Beckham or his teammates or Victoria, where there's no hiding for them what they're thinking. And they made them watch archival footage of themselves or of the story. And in those moments, we had to be very very mindful of what we're doing with the music. You know, it's more minimalistic. It's more, you're as you guys all, like as Patrick and Varun also said, you know, being present in the moment. You want the audience to be thinking, what is David Beckham thinking at this moment? And in contrast to that, we have very fast-paced moments of soccer matches being played where there's high energy. And at that point, you know, the music takes a lead role because a lot of times there's minimal talking. It's just the narration of the football announcer, the soccer announcer. So the music really takes the head role there. But we didn't necessarily have a soccer match theme, you know, or we didn't necessarily have a introspective theme. It was just more the feeling of it, if that makes sense. And the playing with these contrasts that were very obvious in the editing. Maybe just one more thing, I don't want to talk too much, but there's some beautiful moments where it really shows the genius of Michael Hart. He says that he spent, I think, 3 months before he started editing, watching every single soccer match David Beckham has ever played and marked every time he hit the ball. Plus, that Beckham's dad shot 1,500 matches of David playing as a kid. So there's like moments where, you know, in episode 2, where they're talking about how his dad was very tough on him. And you have scenes so masterfully cut where you see David doing a corner kick in his youth, you know, like in the early 90s. And then it fades into a seamless other shot, him being a grown-up doing the same kick from the same position from, you know, a different corner, but still a corner. Like these things are just mind-boggling how they were able to do. And we had to, you know, just musically also switch. So like him as being a kid, we used a more minimal chamber ensemble, and then him being an adult in front of thousands and thousands of people, you know, the ensemble gets slightly bigger.
Well, I still think it's mind-boggling, you know, how quickly you did all this and adapted to maybe a new way of doing things or different styles. So, I mean, again, congratulations. Varun and Patrick, Reservation Dogs includes various generations. Can you talk about how you showcase the parallels in their stories?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is on the script, so we have to give credit to people, to the people in the writers' room for actually putting these people in these interesting situations and building out the conversation around them. But I think from an editing perspective, we had to take a very empathy first approach to like choosing reaction shots and kind of, you know, really move away or even actively fight kind of paternalistic structures that even the audience would bring to kind of a parent generation person and a child, you know, a teenager. You kind of bring, it's very easy for that scene to tilt paternalistic, and that those, so we were just fighting those as much as possible, and there are many places where like we have very poignant moments of the younger generation empathizing with, you know, kind of the emotional trauma that the older generation has and kind of healing together, as opposed to it just being kind of instructional from like, you have to do this, otherwise this, which, you know, which is kind of how most intergenerational relationships in pop culture and TV and film are usually depicted. Um, and you know, that also embodies the native way of teaching, as the show puts it forward. It's like you learn by doing, by observation, by immersion, and just by, you know, observing somebody else's life, as opposed to getting a cheat sheet to be like, follow these instructions. And so it was really great to like start creating that right from the beginning. Like you early episodes we had, I think Uncle Brownie was the first kind of new adult that was introduced in episode 3, and you know, just building that combativeness between kind of a crotchety old man who lives in the woods and like 4 teenagers who's trying to, you know, interact with him desperately, but they're always at even footing. Like there's never, even if he is appearing as somebody kind of larger than life, they're matching that. They're like, no, you're just another uncle. Like we're not going to treat you like some, you know, some big character on a pedestal. And I think making sure that we stayed in that space, and stayed in you know, kept the perspectives balanced between the two of them, maybe sometimes even tilting too far on one side just to pull back on that paternalism. That's my kind of take on the intergenerational relationships, and I think that really makes the show so much richer. And the other thing, we also there's a pattern that we got into with the writers. It was very unsaid, untold. Like there's a lot of life advice type of scenes across the show right from the beginning. And on the page, they would always write them very long, so there would be more kind of instructional, you know, lines on the page. But the writers trusted us to like just take the best of that and leave it open ended. And more than anything else, like the length on the page was more to get many of these actors who some of them are extraordinary and they've done a lot of work, but there are many other secondary characters in the show that haven't done a lot of acting. So it helped them kind of perform that whole range of what all those words gave them, and gave them a framework to go on an emotional journey. And then in editorial, we were doing the bit of like, okay, how do we pull out all these things so that we can leave this open-ended and balanced, as opposed to instructional, and like kind of here's my advice, yeah, kind of a tone.
Yeah, I think Varun and I talk about it a lot, that the humor of this show is, so much of it is sort of this contradictory, like irreverent reverence, where it's like it makes a joke that is sort of it seems like it's poking fun at sort of a tradition or a culture, or you know, a group of people, and then sort of comes back and like levels itself out to show the respect part of that joke, and sort of like, so we sort of net out to this place of like, well, we can laugh about this, right? Like we can talk about this and have an open conversation about what's, you know, not necessarily right or wrong, but more like, let's be transparent about the reality of our world and what we're trying to say here, you know. And also to Varun's point, like, yeah, so much of that feeling comes from the script, and I think our job is to really highlight that type of storytelling and help in a way that's, you know, shaping it. And I think our craft does play a large role in that, you know, especially in the finale, where like the first scene is a mirror of the first scene in the pilot, where there's sort of a radio DJ and stuff, but and it's shots of the town, the fictional town of Oakern, and I think it it's like but it's the differences that create the meaning. You know, it's not a perfect mirror in that it's actually like, yeah, there's a radio announcer, but he's actually talking about the funeral that's happening in the town today instead of just addressing the town at large about, you know, something maybe more slightly superficial. And then the song from the pilot is "I Want to Be Your Dog" by the Stooges, which is like a very, you know, punk rock song. And the song that plays after the DJ cues it up in the finale is "Will the Circle Be Unbroken" by George Jones, which is, you know, a much more mature vibe that sort of, I think, perfectly encapsulates like their journey, these characters' journey, the show's journey, everything, you know, which I sort of said before too. But yeah, so, you know, it's like it goes across the board in terms of like we're trying to show various generations by also talking about the generations of our own show, and like and creating meaning by showing difference. And so there's like a language in the editing that I think came across and that came from a beautiful script to begin with.
Are you having these types of discussions, conversations, say when you're or cutting scenes, collaborating, or is it kind of more like you just kind of go do your thing and then after look at it together? I mean, maybe you get some quick insight into like how you collaborate.
Yeah, I mean, this season was special too because like Varun said, I joined season 2, and we were, you know, it was my third job, remote job. So like, you know, we're still figuring out like how we communicate and how like, you know, COVID affected all of that. But in season 3, it felt like we really figured it all out. I don't know, would you say that, Varun? And
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we started collaborating much more in terms of like sharing scenes or like sharing bits that you know, we think would make the other person laugh. And our first like you know, more intense collaboration was on the season 3 episode 3, which is the Dear Lady episode. And yeah, that instance was well, Varun, yeah, do you want to
Yeah, so I mean, the Dear Lady episode, which is like the one episode in the whole show that's not a comedy at all. Like it really is a kind of a traumatic psychological thriller that deals with the history of Native American kids being kidnapped into boarding schools, missionary schools, you know, which has happened throughout history since kind of colonization of North America, but it has in many places it was happening as recently as 50 years ago or 30 years ago, and there's mass graves all being found. But that's besides the point. But we're dealing with very sensitive subject, and we're dealing with flashbacks of showing young kids, you know, going through this trauma and people who are oppressing them. So that episode took a lot longer to get through. In editor's cut took twice as long. The director's cut took 3 times as long. So we weren't able to keep that on schedule, but everybody in the production knew that this episode is going to be, it's going to take its time. They had like, they had mental health experts on set to, take care of the people who were there. And so I wasn't able to finish the episode by the time I had a planned like 10-day break for a family thing. So that's when Patrick came in and I said, can you take this to the finish line? And so that's how we first started collaborating on this, where we actually were sharing work back and forth, other than just giving each other notes on each other's cuts. And then I took it through to like one round of producer cuts, and then Patrick worked with Sterling for like 2 weeks to get it through the finish line. And then we loved working on that so much, Patrick suggested that one of the episodes that he was originally assigned, which is the finale, he invited me to work on that together so that we could have a fitting send-off to the show as both of us working on it together. And it is a very big episode in terms of the number of characters, and so it would have been editorially challenging and lots of different tones. So we kind of picked and chose, these are the things that I've done before, these are the characters that I know well. So I took, you know, the kind of opening scene with Hokti, played by Lily Gladstone, and then I took the bear and spirit scene, which I had done a lot of their improv scenes before, and a few other I've forgotten which one which ones were mine beyond those two, but there were a lot of like little scenes, ensemble cast filler scenes all around that kind of went in and out of montages in the show. So so that was our collaboration. But beyond that, like I had problem scenes in some episodes where we needed like, oh, do we need a reshoot here? Do we not? And then it's just the brain trust. Everybody jump on Evercast. Let's look at the scene. What would we need here? Can we find some stock that might fit the bill? Can we not? Like, how do you editorially fix something that they didn't have time to shoot enough on the day? And I feel like we did a few of those in season 3, kind of editorial brain trust screenings. Yeah.
All hands on deck.
Yeah.
Anze and Camilo, can you talk about the instruments, sounds, or technologies that were particularly pivotal in creating the sound palette for BECKHAM? Were there any unconventional methods or instruments used? I know you have them.
Well, I mean, the cool thing about the BECKHAM documentary is that it is a documentary, but it really watches like a quintessential British drama, like you would be watching The Crown, for example, or even, you know, yeah. So with that in mind, and I think the Fisher and Michael also had that in mind, is that kind of like British sound for the show. So meaning we used a lot of strings and we used piano and this neoclassical Baroque type harmony. And that really helped us out a lot because we are both classically trained composers. And also I'm a cellist and Camilo is a violinist. So we would play on each other's stuff. Chris Bracado, he's a really great guitar player. So on the episode 3, where it takes place in a lot in Spain and Madrid, we would use some, you know, Spanish flamenco influences. But we would just run in and out of each other's studios and play on each other's stuff. So we never send out demos, quote unquote. Like what we send out to our clients in here, Fisher and Michael and John, if they approve it, that's basically the final version of what, you know, we might go back into the mix and we might go back into the master or re-record something, but it's basically there. Which sets, I think, Bleeding Fingers apart from, you know, a lot of other institutions, or there's not many, but what sets us apart, you know, is the quality control. As Patrick and Varun said, you know, they would give each other notes. We would give each other notes. Mm-hmm. And everything we do goes through the ears of our score producer and CEO of the company, Russell Emanuel. So we would really have so many ears on deck before we would send it out, usually the same day, to the team in the UK and get the notes back. Here we were dealing with real people with real lives, real emotions, and we needed the audience to connect with these characters and draw parallels to their own lives. You know, a lot of us lived through that era, and we knew how David and Victoria were important as cultural icons, but we might not have known just the completely human lives that they lived and the struggles that they lived, and then everyone can relate. So the music had to be something that people could immediately relate to, and music that is non-intrusive. You know, if we used any weird instruments, that would draw you out. For dinosaurs, it's different, you know. You want to evoke that, you know, we wanted to evoke that past and prehistoric planet. I just need to make comparisons here, and hopefully I made my point across. Do you want to add anything?
No. I think you're absolutely right. There was very important conversation that we had at the beginning with the other part of the team, meaning the director and our editor, which is that we needed to just support whatever was happening on the screen, because they had this vision of BECKHAM being more like a 4-hour therapy session. When you watch it, you feel like you're just sitting in a couch, kind of like doing therapy and kind of like working out what actually happened. And so if you end up introducing the elements that Anze actually just mentioned, which is like these weird instruments that nobody has heard before, you ruin that completely. You know, like you take everyone out of the thing. And then the other beautiful thing is with the ensemble that we had, which is mostly strings, very very intimate ensemble, very, it's not like a full-blown orchestra or anything like that. With this ensemble, we were also able to do all the football scenes where the rhythm of it and the pacing of it was paramount, and again, we go back to the same thing. If we had like big drums or like a lot of synthesizers or whatever it is, then you immediately take everyone out of that. And so yeah, part of what Anze was saying, our big responsibility was allowing people to connect with the documentary. But the key part of that is that a lot of people that watch the documentary are not football fans, right? So we needed to also reach out to them and let them connect with this show, without them knowing all the inside baseball references or whatever it is that you usually know, right? And so again, having a very normal, quote unquote, normal or traditional or conventional sounding score was like a key element of this, so that everyone can connect with it, no matter your age, your background, or whatever. Very, very different goal than A Prehistoric Planet that he did last year with Kara.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, and I like the comparison, and just also just highlights the importance of music and how, as a viewer, you react to it pretty instantly. It can make or break an experience. So,
if I may,
yeah,
it's really cool what you're explaining, actually, like that the way you're thinking about it is that you're like, your role is to sort of like tell the audience like how they should be watching it. And I think that's really interesting. And also you guys are talking a lot about how like you're sort of, instruments in the greater composition of this show, and that, like the person leading the showrunner, you said Mike Fisher?
Fisher Stevens.
Fisher Stevens,
excuse me.
Yes.
Fisher Stevens is really setting you guys up for that type of thinking. I think is really interesting, and I think reflects a lot of what happened on Reservation Dogs too, in terms of like how Sterling Harjo sort of sets things up to where it's sort of like, it makes the show feel like it's everyone's voice is being added to it. Like there's a specific vision at the beginning, but that allows people to add instead of alter. And so it's really interesting to hear it from a musical standpoint. And it's obviously, I also really appreciate how much you guys are talking about the editing part of this as well. And it's really interesting.
I mean, it's I think with like the Emmy nominations, we can so quickly go into our own heads and like, because it's our names on the nomination.
Right.
Right. And I always try to step back from that. And, especially with BECKHAM, we I'm going to say this until I die. Like, we were so lucky to be part of this project because Michael and Fisher Stevens, they are true geniuses. And even Hans Zimmer, we had a panel with him last week, and he said that this is one of the best piece of documentary, one of the best documentary series he's ever seen. And I know that if he says this, he means it. So we were given such a great palette to work with. So, then I guess our jobs as composers is figuring out what the editorial team and the director meant with their footage without even speaking too much with them, even though we did. Absolutely. But they produced such an amazing piece of art that we kind of, I guess, intuitively knew where we should go with it. At least that's how I feel. But I think what I'm trying to say is we wouldn't get this Emmy nomination without the show. Like, no freaking way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No freaking way. And the 5 nominations of the BECKHAM documentary really speaks about the how great of a artwork it is.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
not that we particularly are so great, you know.
If I may add
That's
something
right,
here regarding the editors and how we work together with them, I think like I don't know how much people realize that the choices that you guys make on the editing part of it, like when you decide to use a close-up instead of a long shot, and when you decide to cut this in a very fast-paced manner and whatever, you're already telling us so much without actually sending us an email or being on the phone with us. And I would love for people to understand that, you know, because every choice that you make is something that then we as composers can use to, you know, either support that or actually be like, oh, you know what, you're using a close-up here, let me actually do something completely different with the music so that it plays off of that. And so it's just to me is very humbling, and I very much appreciate the work that you guys do with everything that you guys do, because then it's so easy for us to do what we need to do.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you have already everything figured out, right? Because we haven't even talked about something also very important, which is that sometimes you guys are the ones choosing the music with the director. Like you sit down and you start
Right.
using temp music, right?
Mhm.
Like that is gonna be replaced later, but you guys are already like informing our decisions later, either by saying we love this or we hate how this works with that, and already
Yeah.
immediately we have like a common language that we can
Mhm.
speak with. And so anyway, so I just wanted to like you know, bring some attention to that, because without you guys we wouldn't be able to do our jobs.
Well, and
No,
vice
thank
versa
you. I
is the
mean,
truth,
yeah. Same here. I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, where did you guys supply the editing team your previous score to pull from? Or like you guys got a pitch late, right? So they probably they probably use temp music that's not from your previous work. How do you interact with that? Like, is that useful for you that they use your own music, or if it comes from completely different sources?
Well, it's for BECKHAM, I don't think there was any of our music in the temp, but there was, you know, a lot of neoclassical works. There were some Vivaldi. There was the famous Oasis track that plays, I think, at the end of
Yeah.
episode 2.
Like needle drops.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That they ended up licensing in the end, which was I think great that they did. The key thing with working with temp, and I think what Michael Hart did so smartly here, it was more about the pacing, and it was more about whether we're being upfront or far back with the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily so much about a particular piece of music, you know. Only if it, you know, they used an Oasis track. That was like a very particular thing. And so our when working with temp as a composer, your job is to ask the questions to the editor and the director. What do you like about it? What works? What are you trying to get more of or less of? But so we constantly had these conversations, and we tried to figure out what how to pull the best out of the shots that they had. Like, you know, how I was saying before, I love those fades from early BECKHAM to like late BECKHAM. And, you know, those are things that you musically as a composer can really pull out. And no amount of temp can do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I'll say about this is, at least this is my personal opinion about this. I don't like, because this has happened to me in other shows, I don't like when the editors use my music as temp, just because I feel like I need to figure out another way to climb the same mountain, as opposed to starting fresh. You know what I'm saying? Because like, like I remember how I did that piece of music, but then figuring out another way to do the exact same thing without doing the exact same thing is kind of like a big challenge for me. But this is a very personal thing. I know there are composers out there that would prefer that, but since you mention it,
Yeah.
I thought I would say I personally don't like.
No, that's very cool. That's very, and now I will ask the question of all composers that I work with, like, would you prefer that I use your music or not? Because that's very important. No, because I know how I feel when I get stuck, or like get very like, we were talking about this morning, Patrick and I, like when you turn the lens on yourself or your own work, like how critical we can be about it. And if it gets in your way as a composer to hear your own music, then I absolutely do not want to do that. You know, like I want it to be, I want everybody to feel as empowered as they can be when they get their hands on the work. So that's a very good insight. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
It happens with editing too. Like, I mean, that's what's so great about collaborating with another editor, like Varun and I did, is like, you know, I'll cut a scene a certain way, and then when everyone watches it, we're all like, oh, you know, I don't always get it right the first time. Like sometimes that scene sucks, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess we have to go to back to the drawing board and like figure out how to really make this thing sing. And that's really hard to do for your own scene. You're like, okay, but this is how my brain like went from process A to, you know, the end of the process, you know, whatever that is. And so it's great to bring in fresh eyes and be like, hey, can you watch this scene and tell me what it needs? Like, what am I missing? And yeah, so it's really interesting to hear it from that aspect as well.
Well, awesome, guys. I appreciate all your insight into your work. And again, you know, congrats on the Emmy nom. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you to our panelists, Anze, Camilo, Patrick, and Varun, for being here with us today to discuss their incredible work. So thank you guys for being on the show. And also thank you to Impact. Also, thank you to Impact 24 PR for putting this panel together, and to all of you for watching and listening. Be sure to check out the Hollywood Editing Mentor podcast for other panels and interviews. Thanks again.